Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. On today's episode, we're going to have a spoiler-filled discussion about Loki, Episode 2, The Variant. This is Slash Film editorial director, Peter Sciretta, and joining me on this podcast is Slash Film weekend editor, Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Okay, as with all these episodes, we like to do this in segments. We do the feedback segment, which answers some of your questions, emails, some updates since the last episode. We go into our brief reactions. Then we'll do a beat-by-beat breakdown of the entire episode, and we'll end the episode with speculation. So let's start with feedback. And if you've been listening to the show for any regular amount of time, then you know that feedback usually has a section I like to call Pete Was Wrong. And this week it was a billion people wrote into us to correct me that I kept on saying Morbius when Owen Wilson's character's name is Mobius. So I don't know how that happened. In my notes, I wrote Morbius. I knew it was Mobius, and I just kept on saying it. And Brad, why didn't you correct me?
I must not have heard like the R and how you were saying it.
Well, yeah. Apparently, Owen Wilson's character. We'll just break this into our brains. The character's name is Mobius, as in the Mobius strip, which is like that infinite loop, not Morbius, the living vampire, which is also in Marvel. So, okay. We got an email from Mike S. And he writes in, and I'm not sure if I have an answer for this. Maybe you do, Brad. He wanted to know, how does this Loki in this show is from the Avengers 1, right? He was captured at the end of Avengers 1, and he leaped out of that time. How does that Loki know that the Avengers time traveled? Because when he gets in front of the judge, he argues that the Avengers messed everything up by messing with time.
I think he's just basing. I don't think he knows the extent to which what they did, but it's clear that they did travel through time because he makes a crack about smelling two Tony Starks because of how strong his aftershave is. So he could tell that there were some Avengers there that weren't supposed to be.
So I guess that's the way to write around that. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Okay. Last week we honed in on the line, "I'll gut you like a fish," and we were trying to figure out what movie it was from. Brad, you came up with an answer. It was from Ron Howard's Grinch movie. But I think that wasn't actually the movie that I was looking for.
Yeah, it's not. I actually had a conversation with a friend about this too, and it's probably more likely a reference to Scream.
Yeah.
Especially since isn't the character's name, what's the character's name he's talking to? Is it Casey?
Yes, it is.
And that's the name of Drew Barrymore's character in the opening of Scream. So
yes, he says, "I'll gut you like a fish, Casey." And I'm assuming Jim Carrey's line in The Grinch was him, a reference to Scream, because that came out 4 years before.
That's true.
Yeah. The other thing we learned today is, I think last week we were asking, why is this show on Wednesdays? All the shows so far have been on Friday. Why is Disney Plus moving things to Wednesday? And we have an article on Slash Film today from HT, and you can read that. But basically, it seems like Loki just performed so incredibly well, and it seems like Disney doesn't want to compete with Netflix for the weekend. So having their own day in the middle of the week is probably going to be where things end up. They've announced they're shifting things. So Monsters at Work, Turner and Hooch, Behind the Attraction, Chip and Dale, Turning the Tables, The Wonderful World of Mickey Mouse, Growing Up Animal, Short Circuit Season 2 are all switching to Wednesday. So I'm guessing when Mandalorian and those shows show back up, maybe those will be on Wednesday, or will they? I don't know. Actually, it says original movies will continue to bow on Fridays. So I guess Wednesday is the new Friday, Brad. We can take the rest of the week off.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Any thoughts on this, Brad? Are you happy or mad that now we're going to be discussing things midweek? Or
I don't know. The slash film side of me is a little bit frustrated because having this stuff happen in the middle of the week is kind of a clusterfuck. But at the same time, I guess it's better than having being with a bunch of other stuff on Friday. I don't know. There was something about looking forward to this stuff happening on Friday that I don't know, made it more fun, and I guess was a fun way to go into the weekend. but I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess
Now,
I'm torn on it.
I was gonna say, I almost felt like people had the time on the weekend to watch these things, and now it feels like there's gonna be some spoilers going around and stuff.
Yeah, probably lots more complaining about spoilers.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to write us for the feedback section, I can't promise you that we're gonna read your email on the air, but if you want to, you can send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to peter@slashfilm.com, and we might end up reading them in a future episode. And please leave your name and general geographic location so I can mention it on the air. So let's jump into this. Let's give our brief reactions for Loki episode 2, The Variant.
Yeah, and we should probably point out that we have an episode title for the first episode now. We didn't at the time we recorded that episode because we saw an early screener for press, and it didn't have a title attached at the time. But that first episode is called Glorious Purpose.
Which is very fitting. I feel like we should have played a game, Brad. We should have tried to guess the episode title.
Yeah, we probably could have.
Yeah, probably could have. Okay, so let's give our brief reactions for episode 2 of Loki. I'm going to say I like this one even more than the first. And I was a big fan of the first episode. I like that there's more world building, more rule explaining, but it felt like we got to have more fun with it, where the first episode felt like a lot of them explaining things. And the time jumping in this episode feels kind of like what I wanted Doctor Who to be. I'm one of those people that tried to watch Doctor Who and gave up after 2 episodes. So HD probably hates me for that. I'll probably give it a chance at some point, but like this has the fun of that time travel that I kind of wanted, and I'm sure it's probably in there somewhere. Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson are just such a great buddy duo, and I just love their interactions. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely love this episode. This is actually like one of my favorite episodes of Marvel television we've had so far. It's, as much as everything in the first episode was right up my alley as far as time travel and dry comedy, this takes that to another level. It makes the story more engaging as it adds a new layer to the variant that they're chasing. There's just a lot of cool things that are happening here, and it's such a stylish series. Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson's banter continues to be fantastic. I love these long conversations they have that develop their character while still providing us with some exposition as well. It's not as exposition heavy as the first episode, like you said, which I appreciated, and it gets us into like the time crime pursuit part of the series. So yeah, it's picking up steam quick, and I'm just so excited to see where this series continues to go.
Okay, let's jump into it. Let's go into our breakdown. The beginning of this episode, we see some Minutemen show up at a 1985 Ren Fair, which is kind of a fun play because at first you're like, oh, are we in like, medieval times or something? But no, it's just 1985 people trying to pretend like they're in that timeline. And they're there to investigate some Nexus energy, and they're in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Why Oshkosh?
So that's actually, it seems to be anyway, a bit of an Easter egg reference that digs into the history of Marvel Comics, because Oshkosh in Wisconsin, which is a real place, was actually the home of Marvel Comics editor/writer Mark Gruenwald. He's from that town. And interesting, so if you don't know his name, he is actually the creator of Flag Smasher, Battlestar, and U.S. Agent, all characters you should know if you watch The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And another interesting tie that he has to this series is that the character of Mobius, not Morbius, was originally drawn to resemble Mark Gruenwald. And the reason that Mobius has that signature mustache is because Mark did. So there you go.
Okay. So we see the hooded, cloaked Loki. I guess, let's, for the rest of this episode, I mean, I'm assuming that's listening to this has watched the episode.
Let's just say the variant.
Let's say the variant. They use the Minutemen against each other. The variant takes one of the Minutemen hostage and leaves through a time door. So the fun thing about the sequence is it takes place while the song "Holding Out for a Hero" by Bonnie Tyler plays over the loudspeaker, which seems to be, like, for me, the only reason that this scene takes place in the 80s, but I don't know. Who is the hero we're waiting for, Brad? Is it Loki?
Who knows? I'm gonna say this on here because originally we put it in our Easter egg article, but it kind of felt like it didn't fit in with the rest of the others and was just kind of an aside thing. I immediately thought that this might be a reference to Shrek 2. Did you think of that at all?
Oh, that didn't occur to me.
Yeah, because the end of Shrek 2 features this sequence where Shrek and all of his friends, human Shrek even, are like assaulting the castle after Prince Charming and Fiona have been married, and there's a celebration, and it's set to a cover of Holding Out for a Hero. And it has this like epic feel to it, and because of the Renaissance Fair setting and everything, I wondered if maybe it was an allusion to that. So I wonder if we'll be able to get like confirmation on that one day.
Interesting. Okay, so Loki is sitting at Mobius's TVA desk. He's reading the Jet Ski magazine that he has there, and he's talking to Miss Minutes, who is now apparently off the screen, quizzing him about the timeline. It's like a hologram of Miss Minutes. They use this moment to explain when a Nexus event branches past the red line, that's the point that the TVA are unable to change the Nexus event and could lead to, I quote, the destruction of the timeline and the collapse of reality as we know it, period. So they're obviously setting this up for later in this episode when that happens, or is going to happen.
Yeah, well, yeah, it doesn't quite get to red line, but a bunch of, we'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I love the world building of this world. I know I've probably said that way too much. I wish they would explain, as much as I love it, I wish they would explain it a little bit more, because, for instance, in Loki's situation, how does this work, Brad? Maybe you have a better hold on this than I do, because they have taken him out. Like, he's now removed from the Avengers 1 timeline, right? So he doesn't go back to Asgard, and he doesn't go on to do all those things. So wouldn't that cause another timeline, because the fact that character isn't there anymore?
I've been thinking about that too, and I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, because like obviously they've, Mobius used the fact that Loki's fate in that timeline is something that resigns him to death no matter what. And so, but yeah, I'm wondering what happens, to the timeline if he's not there, because he's a variant for leaving it, which means he was supposed to stay there and follow that path. So yeah,
like they don't restore another Loki or another version of Loki or anything, right?
As far as I know. So yeah, that's a very good question, and yeah, I honestly don't have a good answer for that. I really don't. Yeah. I really don't know.
I mean, I'm a person. Back to the Future is my favorite movie of all time. I love time travel stuff. I'm a nerd like that. So I just feel like they had to have thought of this. Like they probably have a reason, and I'm just wondering why they haven't even dropped it in there, like in Miss Minute saying in the background or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Mobius shows up, gives Loki a TVA jacket that says variant on the back, which is kind of funny. I should mention, after last week's episode, I went to Disney California Adventure recently opened Avengers Campus, and it was interesting. When I was there, Loki was in his God of Mischief outfit, the big green outfit that we know from, when he was in the original Thor movie. But after that episode dropped last week, they changed Loki out with his like TVA jumpsuit, and he was accompanied by 2 Minutemen in the park. And I'm sure if people don't go to Disneyland a lot, they don't know the significance of this, but usually stuff in the parks take a lot of time. Imagineering is like months, if not years behind things. So like, for instance, if you meet Thor in the parks, it's the costume from the first Thor movie. Like they haven't bothered to update it. When you have like a big hit like Coco or Moana, like it seems to take like a year later before you see the character in the park, because like just the parks are on a different timeline than the movies. And where was I going with this? Because he has a new outfit. I'm wondering if in the parks he's not going to have the jumpsuit anymore. Is he going to have the jacket that says variant on the back of it? That's my question. Are they going to update it every week? Anyways, okay, I'm getting too off track here. So they are briefed on the variant's appearance in the 80s and say it's unclear what kind of Loki they're dealing with. And Loki jokes that it's the lesser kind. And here we see like there's a projection showing a bunch of different Lokis. Like there's a frost giant Loki. There's a version of Loki that I guess he won the Tour de France. There's a Viking version of Loki. Brad, maybe you can explain this to me. And where do these other versions of Loki exist?
I think that potentially they have knowledge of other variants that have existed before, maybe at one point. I mean, because Loki is pretty
because
old.
they say they're very familiar with Loki because they've pruned a lot of Lokis. So that means they've dealt with those Lokis in the past.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe it's from. Oh, actually, this makes sense. So Loki's a variant, right? Right now,
Yes.
So there's probably been plenty of other times, as we saw, in the TVA office, where people have tried to escape the timeline and mess things up, which is why they've collected all those Infinity Stones and all that other stuff from people who have tried to time travel and do things that would mess up the sacred timeline. So presumably, they've probably encountered some other Lokis who have tried to do the same thing, creating mischief by time traveling and screwing things up.
I guess I'm just confused because we're led to believe that there's only one timeline. So there's only one multiverse, right? There's not other multiverses, but it seems to me like there's other multiverses.
Well, I think that maybe what it is like, I don't know, Mobius says like time works different down there. So maybe because they can see into the past and into the future, and every time seems to exist almost all at once, that maybe that's how those variants came to be, but they've always stopped them. So there's never been any actual separate timelines, but just different time points from the sacred timeline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it does. Okay, so Loki argues the semantics between duplication casting and illusion projection, which to me sound very much like the same thing. Loki is there to be an expert to catch this variant, and they're leading him. By the way, this whole thing gets kind of complicated, Brad, because we're now calling the female Loki the variant, but the male Loki is wearing a jacket saying he's the variant. Well, whatever. Okay, we'll just continue. So Loki's there as an expert. He wants to help them catch the variant Loki, and they're leading him on with the possibility of meeting the timekeepers. Like that's what he wants to do. He obviously has his own agenda here. We get more rules of this world, including that they can't just show up at the moment the Nexus changing event happens or before it, because that destabilizes the time flow, which doesn't make much sense to me, but at least they had some kind of reason rather than not a reason. But okay. I really love the dynamic they've kind of created here with the Minutemen who don't trust Loki, but Mobius is the one person who kind of believes and wants him to do good and help them. And yeah, anyways, I just like how they've kind of set up that dynamic. Loki lies in an attempt to get a meeting with the timekeepers, but Mobius calls him on it, and they reset the timeline by setting off the reset chargers, which we were told, quote, prune the affected radius of a branch timeline, allowing time to heal all its wounds. So what actually happens when one of these charges reset time?
I think it's exactly what we talked about with that first episode, where it resets the timeline to how it was before that interruption from the variant took place.
So it removes anything, including the variant, from the situation. So like they were never there.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Mobius meets Ravonna Renslayer. Is that her name? Ravonna Renslayer?
Yeah.
Yes. The judge from the first episode, which for some reason I didn't think was going to come back in another episode, but apparently she's the main character. So in the comics, this character first appeared in Avengers 23 in December 1965 and was created by Stan Lee and Don Heck. Ravonna was the daughter of King Corellius, a ruler of the 40th century Earth. She eventually met Kang the Conqueror and became his lover. And basically what I'm trying to tell you, Brad, is it doesn't seem like there's much of a comic book backstory that's going to be used in this TV series, but she is a character from the comics. And I think the one thing you can gather from the comics is that she has a gifted intellect.
Also, I do think that there's a way that some of her comic history can be used in this show, and I already have a feeling that Ravonna Renslayer is somebody that we shouldn't trust.
Okay. Bring that up when we get to it.
I will.
So Mobius is meeting with Ravonna. She shows us that Mobius has a lot more in common with Loki than we thought. That he has kind of a soft spot for broken things. And Mobius argues that maybe Loki is going to change. And Ravonna says it's not possible unless the Timekeepers decree it. Now, when she said that, and I was watching this the second time taking notes for this podcast, I was thinking to myself, the Timekeepers this is kind of like a Minority Report situation here we have here. Yes. Where if you've never seen Minority Report, well, pause this podcast and go watch that movie because it's awesome. But, it has these people that kind of predict the future, and what's to say that they couldn't be wrong? So I guess that's the thought that came into my head here when she's saying, it's not possible unless the Timekeepers decree it. What if the Timekeepers are wrong? Can they be wrong?
I mean, that's a good question. Is it the Timekeepers who are predicting what happens, or is the Timekeepers who are allowing what happens to happen? At what point does something that happens in the timeline become something that they want to change, or something that they need to change to preserve the timeline? If, I think that is what that would be the larger question, is whether or not the Timekeepers are actually keeping time or controlling time.
Yes, that's where I was headed with this. So I'm glad we're on the same page. Mobius, and by the way, we know nothing. We've seen this one episode. This is all stupid theories.
Yeah, all merely speculation.
Yeah. Mobius asks how they were doing, and Ravonna says, how do you think? To which Mobius reveals to us that he wouldn't know because he's never met them. So when I'm taking notes the second time watching this over, I'm thinking about this Minority Report. Like, maybe they could be wrong. Maybe they are controlling time. And then it occurs to me that, none of our main protagonists have met these Timekeepers. We just see like these statues, these monolithic statues of them in the city. Like in the judge's office, there's like these like almost looks like armors of them, and they're like in her chamber there was like those big faces in the background. And also last week, I think I mentioned in the credits that there was a propaganda poster in a locker that said always watching, and I said it was one of the Watchers, but I incorrectly identified that that was actually one of these Timekeepers. So there's like propaganda, like they're always watching and whatever. And I'm just wondering, in the comics, these Timekeepers actually exist. They're these 3 reptilian creatures, like humanoid reptilian creatures. And I guess I'm wondering, is it possible that the Timekeepers might not even exist, that they might be this thing that is presented to these people of the TVA to keep them in line? And I don't know. I'm starting to see some like religious and cults allegories in the show that like maybe
for sure
there's something bigger going on here. What do you think?
Yeah, part of me is thinking that if the Timekeepers ever existed, that maybe they haven't been around for a while, and that maybe there's somebody else who is pulling the strings of the TVA.
The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, this is where my lack of trust for Ravonna comes in, because I feel like she might be acting on somebody else's behalf, and I don't think that it's actually the Timekeepers. And the reason I mentioned Ravonna's Marvel Comics history potentially coming into play a little bit is there have been some hints that maybe Kang the Conqueror might be involved in some way. I'm going to throw it back real quick to episode 1 because we didn't get to dig into these details because we hadn't yet, really taken a look at close Easter eggs or anything like that because we recorded shortly after we had seen the first episode. But at the end of the first episode, when the Minutemen end up in Oklahoma and they find that like weapon that looks like a futuristic shovel that has glowing elements, when they put their little tablet in front of it to identify it, they mention it being from the third millennium, which is another way of saying the year 3000. And do you know what Marvel Comics villain comes from the year 3000?
Kang
the Conqueror. And something that's also a little bit interesting, and this is something that I just personally noticed, is that if you look at the animated PSA about the Timekeepers and what the TVA does and everything, when they have the 3 Timekeepers lined up, the one in the middle has a blue face. Do you know which Marvel villain has a blue face in the comics?
Kang the Conqueror?
Yeah. And the animation of that blue Timekeeper also somewhat resembles the face of Jonathan Majors. Do you know what villain he's playing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Hold on. Let me. This is the easy one. Hold on. Kang the Conqueror?
It's Kang the Conqueror.
So basically, Kang the Conqueror is going to be the Mephisto of this season, where we just keep on saying it's Kang, it's Kang.
Probably.
Yeah.
But I do think that this, I don't know, the theory about this holds a little bit more weight and makes sense, because if the Timekeepers are the keepers of time and the quantum realm is the method by which you can travel through time, it would stand to reason that Kang the Conqueror, who is supposed to be the villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, would probably be familiar with both time travel, and the quantum realm. And I feel like that there's the potential here for Kang the Conqueror to be like a fallen timekeeper or something like that, or even a banished timekeeper, who has now become a villain for whatever reason. So this is just me thinking out loud. I honestly have no idea. It could go, any which way, but I do feel like that there's some interesting connective tissue here.
Hey, we've been right with our theories in the past on this podcast, but we've also been very wrong. So take it for what it's worth. Also worth noting, in the background of the scene, we see this tape-to-tape machine on the wall recording the entire meeting. So who's going to listen to this meeting? I guess we're to assume it's the Timekeepers?
Sure, probably. I mean, at this point, I feel like there's just so many bureaucratic rules and things they have to follow to keep track of time and everything. That's just one of those, mundane things that they do, just the same way, detectives record, interrogations and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, we are also told that they are closely monitoring this case and they need this variant caught, which kind of makes me wonder, like, can the Timekeepers not see the results of what the TVA does? Does that make sense? Because, like, they're able to see all of time from beginning to the end.
Well, I wonder if that's maybe what makes this more about time control as opposed to timekeeping, because if they were really just keeping time, then you would think that they would be able to see what the outcome was of this. But maybe it's the existence of these variants and branches of the timeline that make it so that they can't control what's happening.
Good point. Okay, so Mobius signs some papers and comments on the Franklin D. Roosevelt High School pen, and comments that he doesn't remember this pen and that it must be from another analyst. So this moment here, I know some people have said that, like, have suggested that it's like an Easter egg. I forget, what was the Easter egg you brought up from Nerdist?
I think it was something with Franklin or something being like the name of Reed and Sue's kids or something like that.
Yeah, that seems like a stretch to me. When you have a protagonist on camera say, comment like, oh, what is this? Usually it's not like some kind of far seeking Easter egg reference. Usually it's like, oh, you want the audience to also ask, hey, what's this? Remember this thing for later. So my question is, what is this? How does this relate to anything? We know that Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, was the 32nd president of the United States. He served from 1933 to 1945 and was the only U.S. president to have served more than 2 terms. He's been mentioned a couple times in the MCU so far. Most notoriously, Phil Coulson mentions that FDR formed the SSR, which was the basically the predecessor for Shield, what turned into Shield. So there are some MCU connections, but I think there's something more here. I don't know what it is. So we'll put a pin in this. I mean, I guess we could also just acknowledge that maybe this is a moment establishing the fact that Mobius believes that Ravonna has some kind of secret close relationship with another analyst. That might come back later on.
Yeah, I mean, whatever this is, I think that this is one of those details that jumped out to me that immediately feels like the kind of thing that when a detective thinks back on a conversation or situation, it's like the one clue that makes them realize, oh, this is what's really going on. So I think that this passing casual reference to to Ravonna having some other agent that she's sweet on who like she's works with in the same way that she does Mobius. Is actually somebody who maybe whoever is pulling the strings and behind whatever's happening. There's something more going on there.
Yeah, I do want to mention that I did look up the high school, and there are a bunch of schools that are FDR high school. One of the most or like the biggest ones. There's one in Texas, and there's also one I think near Brooklyn, which I've seen some people say like Captain America went to FDR high school, but there's really no, I think, connection. There's nothing in the movies or the comics that I think connects to that. And even Peter Parker, who went to school around there, I went to some other school. What's his school?
It's
I have it on top.
Some science academy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's move on. But I do think I will argue to the death that there's something here. This is just like a small like Easter egg to some kind of Marvel reference.
Especially because it's not really a Marvel reference. Like there's nothing like tied to like that high school or FDR or anything that like it would be like a cute little, Easter egg. There's nothing specific. So like it has to be important somehow.
You know what? I'm going to plant my flag here. I'm coming up with this on the seat of my pants. I think that one of these adventures in the next 4 episodes is going to bring them or mention FDR high school. And that's when he's like, they're either going to have to go to like, the variant is at this high school doing something or whatever. And that's when Mobius is going to realize.
Yeah, I think that's probably a safe bet.
Yeah. Okay. Loki thinks he's kind of like hot shit because Mobius lays out his entire double cross plan to seize control of the TVA from the timekeepers. This whole back and forth interaction here, I think, is like great and just shows how awesome like Owen Wilson is. I'm just so glad he's in this. When they first announced he was cast for the show, I was like, that's weird, but yeah. I'm just.
And what's even better is like he's not necessarily doing anything particularly special per se because he's still just being his normal Owen Wilson kind of self. But I think it's that contrast and his like. Just that wry humor that he brings and how it works with Loki that makes that character work so well.
Yeah, it's also that there's, I don't even want to say world-ending stakes because it's not, it's universe-ending stakes here in like he's just being Owen Wilson and kind of casual about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. They go down this elevator in an enclosed atrium, which I'm 99% sure is the hotel in Atlanta that I've stayed at a bunch for set visits. This is the Marriott Marquis.
Oh yeah, the lobby of the TVA when Loki was introduced in the first episode is like they clearly took the the towering halls and everything that when you look up and just kind of modified it a little bit.
Yeah, if you've ever been there, you recognize this from a lot of movies and TV shows. It was the Capitol Tribute Center from the Hunger Games movies. It's like a almost 500 feet tall atrium. It was the largest in the world upon completion in 1985. And it recently, I think, got beat out by some building in Dubai. But yeah, okay. They get off at floor 372, which is a nod to Thor issue 372, which saw the debut of the TVA. So good reference there. Which, by the way, Brad did this whole article with Easter eggs and references. I'll link that in the show notes. You have 11 of them? Yeah, 11 different references. So check that out.
And to clarify, too, one thing that I want to say that we do is there are a lot of Easter egg articles out there that list things that aren't really Easter eggs. For example, the identity of the variant being revealed in this episode, someone like making that an Easter egg, or making like the TVA an Easter egg because like this is from Marvel Comics, and it's like, well, no shit, because it's an adaptation. But like we're digging into like details where there's like hidden meanings or references, like deep cuts that you wouldn't otherwise know about.
Yes, true. Okay, so Loki is left by himself in the library and learns the only file he has access to is actually his own. Looking at his record, he sees the cold numbers for what happened on Ragnarok. The destruction of Asgard resulted in nearly 10,000 casualties, and there was 0 variance energy detected. Loki is having a real emotional reaction here, and Tom Hiddleston does a great job of being able to balance, like, you know, time travel with superhero with whatever he's doing here. What do you think he's feeling here? Is it regret? Is it the sadness of the loss of the people that adopted him, or is it that he had no choice? It was destined to happen no matter what.
I think that, I mean, maybe a little bit of all the things, but I think mostly that no matter how much he likes to distance himself from really being, you know, Asgardian, or from showing any, you know, sense of feeling for these people who adopted him or anything like that, I think that, you know, he, as we saw in the first episode, he really does have feelings for those closest to him and regrets the role that he's had to play as the God of Mischief. And you know, knowing that this was his, you know, essentially his home, even though it's not really where he's from, like that's where he was raised, that's where he grew up. So yeah, I think that it's hitting him in the same way that, you know, seeing what his life would have been play out and seeing those that he would have lost, you know, hit him.
Yeah, I just love that, like, this is just like this never ending library where they just have like papers on every event that's ever happened in the history of not even the world, but the universe.
Yeah,
it's like all on papers. If you got to access it, you got to like type on this old computer to find the file on the shelf. Okay, so this leads Loki to have an epiphany that the variant could be hiding in apocalypses, which is such a cool idea. That you could do whatever you want because it doesn't change the timeline because of the location and time that you are specific at. And of course, he explains this to Mobius using like his food that he was going to eat. I do want to bring up here that Casey is back again, and he's in the background of the scene, and he's drinking Boku juice, which actually Loki uses to pour into Mobius's, what was it, cereal or whatever he was eating. This is another soft drink featured in this show, that limited time soft drink. It was available in the 1990s to the early 2000s and was marketed as an adult juice box. Did you ever have this, Brad?
No, this is the first time that I've heard of it.
Oh, really? It had these television ads. I got to send you one of these. It had comedian Richard Lewis in these television ads, and he'd be ranting about how like children get to have all the fun things, and why can't adults have their own juice boxes? And this is a juice box, but it's not for kid. It even has like you don't use a straw, Brad. You like what do you do that? You like rip one, like the thing open so you can drink out of it, and then every ad would end with him taking a sip, and Lewis would say to the camera, "Is that too much to ask?" That was the thing.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
The whole point was there was juice boxes for adults in the 1990s, and it failed miserably. But I bring this up because I think this show has this obsession with limited time drinks. Last week I mentioned Beverly, which Loki was the flight attendant tried to serve Loki on the plane. But then also in this episode and last episode, Mobius is seen drinking like his favorite drink of choice is Josta soda. Have you ever had Josta?
I haven't had Josta.
Yeah, we have a whole article on this from Vanessa Armstrong. I'll link it in the show notes. But this is a energy drink from Pepsi. It was actually the first energy drink that Pepsi ever made. They made it in 1995. It didn't last until the 2000s. It had a fruity, sugary flavor, and it was made of guarana. And their slogan was "Better do the good stuff now." So it was like one of those things where, like, had a commercial with an old man speaking to a younger man, and the old man like tells the younger man about his life as a youth and how he wished he had more fun. And it'd be like, Josta, better do more good stuff now.
Okay.
So Vanessa Armstrong in this article tries to connect the dots and say that maybe Mobius loves Josta because he also loves other 90s era stuff like jet skis. But I'm not sure if that's the case. So now that we have 3 of these, Brad, like, do you think there's any, is this just a running gag in the background that the creators are doing? Or does this just say something about like, oh, the only people that can enjoy these limited time things that went away are like this TVA, that they can go back in time and like get these, even Josta had like their big fan community, and there was like outrage when Pepsi took it away, and like a big campaign of like bring it back, and then they never did. Like, what do you think they're trying to say here?
Yeah, I think it's just this fun little detail. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we got like a new drink from a different time every single episode, which would be really cool.
Pepsi Clear in the next one, and then what would be your favorite soft drinks that have gone the wayside?
Oh gosh, that's a very
Surge. Well, Surge made a comeback.
Yeah, Surge made a comeback, and so did Crystal Pepsi. Man, that is a very good question.
Ecto Cooler, but that made a comeback too.
Ecto Cooler also made a comeback. Gosh, I don't. You know what? What I'm going to say is I'm going to say Quick chocolate milk, but the original formula, because at some point they changed it, and it's just not as good as it used to be.
I agree. Okay. Come back to me next week if you have any other suggestions of soft drinks that went away that should come back, because I know you're into that. Okay, they go to Pompeii, test out the theory. Mobius wants to start with small by making bird noises, but Loki instead decides to go big and tell everyone that they're about to die and they're from the future. No Nexus event is caused. My favorite moment of the episode, I think, is when Loki asks Mobius why he's obsessed with jet skis. And then Mobius like explains that most things in histories are kind of dumb and everything gets ruined eventually. But for a brief moment in the 1990s, there was a beautiful union of form and function. I just love that he's obsessed with jet skis and has never ridden one, which, Brad, what does that mean? What does that tell us about the series?
I mean, at some point, if we don't get Mobius on a jet ski, it's a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah. It's going to be in a climactic action sequence, or it's going to be like the end credit scene for the last episode.
Well, and it's got to be, and it could potentially spell doom for Mobius, depending on how it goes, because he says something about if he does that, then he becomes a variant.
Oh. And it also means that we'll probably end up sometime in the 1990s in a place like Miami or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Loki challenges Mobius. By the way, I apologize because I know sometimes we like to speculate on things, but sometimes it's like we use the show as like we're trying to solve a problem. But my mind just thinks like that. I'm like, when someone brings this up, this is going to pay off later. So Loki's challenging Mobius's beliefs here. There's 3 giant lizards created by the TVA, and everyone in it has been created by these 3 giant lizards. And Mobius argues that existence is chaos, and we just try to make sense of it, and it's just chaos. Loki says that if everything has been predetermined, past, present, future, how does it all end? Mobius says it's a, quote, work in progress, that while the Minutemen protect the Minutemen protect what's happened before, the timekeepers are untangling the epilogue of the infinite branches. And then what? When everything is decided and they're like they when they eventually, because eventually he brings up the fact that like the Minutemen, their work is going to be done. Like they will have ended all the branching and all the Nexus events, what then? And Mobius says, when that happens, it's going to be just, they're going to meet in peace at the end of time. So this is something we really didn't dive into last week, and it's interesting, and it's such a weird concept for a mainstream Disney show, and I love it. It's just, well, first of all, it's weird that this place was created by the Timekeepers. All these people were created by the Timekeepers. Brad, do we believe that? Do we believe that Mobius was actually a being created by the Timekeepers?
I mean, I guess it depends on if you believe in the Timekeepers, probably, and that just gets into a whole realm of existential questions that even permeate the real world. So yeah, I mean, I suppose it's possible.
See, here's where my brain's going, and this is probably like a way conspiracy theory corner at this point, and I'm sure this show is not going in this direction. But all the stuff registering kind of like a cult and kind of, I don't know, almost like what Mobius is saying. He just accepts the role that he has. Almost feels how like cults indoctrinate like new members, and we've seen this with other sci-fi things of how like the stormtroopers abduct kids as little kids, and then they grow up to become stormtroopers, and that's probably the worst example of this. But I'm kind of wondering if like Mobius was like maybe a kid in the 1990s that was like abducted and is being used by someone for their own control of time or something.
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Do you think I'm going too far out there?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay. I will admit that I think that's probably too far, but I don't know. I just feel like some underlining, like it just seems weird that he's just okay with this role and never having fun and reading a magazine about jet skiing. And I don't know. I just don't see where this is going. But, and also at the same time, Brad, if you were a TVA member in this scenario, maybe there's a reason why you wouldn't want that time to come where everything's done in peace, because then your complete purpose is gone.
That's also a good point too. Another thing I just thought of too is I wonder if maybe I don't know, if maybe there's a chance that some of the TVA is formed by people who were once variants.
Oh, that's a good point too.
Like maybe that's why he does have such a fascination with the 90s. Like it's something that he misses, but I don't know.
That's a good point. Well, the reason why I brought up people, the variants, or the TVA members maybe not wanting this end goal to happen and them to have no purpose is maybe that's why your theory of, well, actually, I'm not sure if Kang the Conqueror fits into that, but
yeah,
but that character maybe I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll put a pin on that. So Mobius remembers the kablooey candy bar, the variant left with the child in France we saw in the last week's episode. Turns out that they were only sold on Earth from 2047 to 2051, which explains why I couldn't find anything about it when I was Google searching it last week. They're able to track the candy back to a Category 8 hurricane in Alabama in 2050. So Ravana pushes back against Loki's idea. Loki's idea is that the variant is there hiding out in this Category 8 hurricane in a big superstore that has access to all the food and all the stuff they need. Is she really pushing back against this idea because she doesn't believe Loki, or is it because she doesn't want Mobius to go back there and stop whatever's going to happen?
Yeah, that was my thought too. It's like it's that she has a concern of that this plan's going to get found out.
Yeah. Okay, so civilians in Alabama are using the superstore. It's called Rock's Cart as a shelter during this horrific storm. And we're going to have an article, I think, on Slash Film about this, but the logo looks similar to the Roxxon Corporation, which originated in the comic books in 1974 in an issue of Captain America 180. In the MCU, it's appeared as a car sponsor on the Grand Prix and Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3. The false Mandarin, played by Ben Kingsley, shoots an accountant from Roxxon on live television. Roxxon gas station was also the setting for a live action short film that Marvel did called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer. And that's where Clark Gregg, as Agent Phil Coulson, stopped there. So the company has appeared a bunch of times in the MCU. It's appeared more times in like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil, Cloak and Dagger, but none of those are really canon. Anyways, this company is basically just used as like this big, huge company. It's big, whenever Marvel needs a big, giant corporation. So there's that. Do you think there's anything there, or do you think it's just a fun reference?
I think it's mostly just a fun reference, but I think it's also worth pointing out that Roxxon had a key part to play in a certain Thor comic book arc that was the same arc that saw Jane Foster become the Mighty Thor, and that's something that's coming up in Thor: Love and Thunder. So could be a setup for a presence there, but yeah, Roxxon is definitely one of those companies that just like it kind of gets thrown around as just this fictional corporation in the Marvel universe.
Yeah. So they get there. Loki uses magic to dry his clothes. The Minutemen agents split up and won't let Loki go with Mobius. We pull out to see the cloaked variant watching security monitors with a ticking clock counting down the localized apocalypse. They find the variant in the greenhouse. He's taking the form of someone else, and we see that the variant can kind of take the form of whoever he or she touches. He takes the form of one of the Minutemen. Loki asks, "Me, I presume?" And the variant says, "Please, if anyone's anyone, you're me." So Loki and the variant talk, and they walk by. I'm not sure if you noticed this, Brad. I don't think you put in your Easter eggs, but they're walking through the aisle of the Superstore, and they walk past an Arm & Hammer logo, which I thought was a fun nod to Thor. And the variant keeps changing between bodies. Loki tells the variant his plans to overthrow the Timekeepers and offers the variant to be his lieutenant. The variant says that they are not interested in rolling the TVA. Mobius finds Hunter C-20, the Minutemen agent that was taken hostage in the 1980s. She's just repeating herself, saying, "It's real." What's real, Brad? She just keeps on saying, "It's real. It's real."
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering too. She does say that not to call the TVA because she gave away how to find where the Timekeepers are. We don't know how to find them, but she apparently gave it away to the variant. Loki thinks he's real smart for figuring out where the variant's location was and argues that it makes him the superior Loki before realizing the variant's plan was to lure them all there, and then blow them up and reset charges. Or at least that's what Loki believes. So for a moment there, he goes from like, "I'm a genius" to "I'm an idiot," which I liked. Loki and the variant have a battle in the store, which is kind of fun. They use like vacuums. There's like toy dogs and stuff. And then finally the variant reveals themselves, removing the hood. It's revealed that it's actually a female Loki, maybe. It looks like a female Loki. It has like the horns and everything. And by the way, the actor is credited in the credits as the variant, and the actress playing this character is Sophia Martino. Yeah, she's an English actress who has been in a lot of stuff across the pond. She's an acclaimed. She's like in this acclaimed British dark comedy sitcom called The Flowers, which aired a couple seasons on Channel 4. But back to the episode. Variant tells Loki, quote, "This isn't about you." And just then the countdown ends. The reset charges begin to initialize. initialize surrounding the store. We are led to believe that they're going to erase Loki, Mobius, the Minutemen, and everybody there. But just then, the time doors open and send these charges elsewhere throughout time. We see back at the TVA monitoring the timeline, which is now branching off into many different directions, almost like a tree. So we now led to believe that the charges were sent to various places along the sacred timeline. All hands on deck. The TV agents, including Ravana, rush into action. You actually saw like there was an Easter egg in her office there, right?
Yeah. There's actually two, because when she reaches for her baton that's on the shelf, it's on a shelf of what Mobius refers to as trophies from other cases, including one that was apparently brought by that agent that he thinks that she's also sweet on. And he talks about a snow globe, and that snow globe, you don't really get to see it when he first talks about it earlier in the episode, but then when she grabs her baton, you can see the base of that snow globe, and it says San Diego, and it looks like a very touristy kind of snow globe that you might get for like a gift, for an uncle if you visited San Diego or something like that. And then I think that's probably might be like a nod to like Comic-Con or something like that, just for the fans. And then the second thing is Ravana used to be a Minuteman before she became a judge, and her helmet that she had when she was a Minuteman is there, and her designation is A23. And that character first appeared in Marvel Comics in Avengers issue number 23.
I like that one. That's a good one. Okay, so the variant, at first it looked like she was waving goodbye to Loki, but then she walks into the time door and like Loki follows before Mobius and the Minutemen arrive. And then that's how the episode ends. The episode ends with another big reveal. We've revealed that Loki is actually female Loki, or is she? Which we can talk about in speculation. And I don't know where the show is going, because I thought the show was going to be Loki and Mobius kind of going through time trying to stop this other Loki. But now Loki is with Loki, or the variant, whatever you want to call it. I guess let's just... before we get into speculation, Brad, any thoughts on the ending of this episode?
I mean, it's awesome. It's a great reveal, and yeah, I'm also wondering this too. And so I guess now what they have to do is go back to these places where these charges were set and try and set things right or fix them, or to figure out why those places were where those grenades were set. I guess.
I guess it doesn't seem like they have enough time, judging by how fast those branches are moving off. I mean, I know that it's trying to be dramatic at the end of the episode, showing that computer screen, but it really seems like they don't have enough time before it hits the red line.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I would like to point out too, one of the things that I point out in our Easter eggs article is that when that event happens and the timeline is bombed, there are several Marvel locations that fans should be familiar with that are listed alongside a wide range of dates that were fun references to the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah. Were you able to connect any dots? Were there like any dates or planets that connect to something?
So there's like, it doesn't really seem like I try for some of these dates. Like I tried to dig to see if there was any like comic book issue reference that was hidden in there somewhere. And it was like coming up with messy Google searches. That was tough to really pinpoint anything, but like it's, the references I think to the Marvel locations are merely just to like be there to, as a familiar reference for Marvel fans. But then there were also some like real world locations that were put in there, and I couldn't figure anything out about like why those would be important either. Cause like there were these United States towns, Kingsport and Cookeville and Thornton, and Kingsport and Cookeville are both in Tennessee. But I couldn't figure out like any big links there. And there wasn't any like major event or disaster or anything that happened there. The New York 1947 was kind of an interesting one because part of Agent Carter takes place there. And if you actually go look at our Easter egg article, I linked to an interesting theory that I think is probably just more of a theory than anything, as interesting as it is. Because I guess in the first episode of Loki, when Loki's being apprehended by the TVA and brought in for the first time, if you look in the background, there's a woman who is like dressed in like 40s, 50s clothing that kind of resembles Peggy Carter. And so there's a theory going around that maybe the TVA could potentially be pursuing Captain America for violating the sacred timeline. They're not from the Infinity Stones being returned, but from staying back in the 1940s with Peggy Carter. I don't think it's probably a thing that's going to happen, because I feel like since we
Do you
saw...
think that's intentional, or do you think people are reading into that?
I think people are reading into it. I honestly think it's just a woman who was in, happened to be in that older clothing and had a hairstyle similar to Peggy Carter because of the time period. Because if you try and think about it logically, like, Captain America would have to be avoiding the TVA for a long time, and constantly evading them, especially because we see him as an old man. And since we've seen how quickly a variant can set off the sacred timeline, you would think that if he was avoiding them for that long, that it would have created a multiverse event. And I guess that it's possible that maybe that could be one of the many triggers that we're seeing that does create a multiverse event, where why we get timeline splits and things like that. But I just don't think that it's likely.
Okay, let's get into the speculation. So I guess my first question in speculation is, who is the variant? Because it looks like a female version of Loki, but I don't even understand how that exists, because if there's only one timeline, there's only one universe. I would understand if there's multiverses and there's a female version of Loki who could come from a different multiverse. And I know we've seen the trailer for Loki, where there's a backdrop of like a destroyed city, where we see like the Stark Tower from the Avengers movies. It's kind of in the rubbles of this destroyed city. So that almost makes me think like maybe she's from this other multiverse, but I don't know. It's kind of weird. This TVA thing is making us rethink what we thought about this entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I feel like for a couple of years now, we've kind of been on the train of like, there's different multiverses, and we're like watching one of these multiverses, and the TVA are kind of presenting the story to us that's kind of making us reconceptualize what is happening.
Yeah, it makes it seem like the multiverse hasn't technically been created, or I guess technically recreated yet, since there was a multiverse before and they fixed it into one main timeline. I guess maybe it's possible that there are branches that have existed that either A, the timekeepers don't know about, or B, knew about and existed for whatever reason.
There's also the possibility, I'm just thinking about this now, but if all this stuff goes wrong and it hits the red line and it starts these different multiverses, that she is from one of the multiverses that she created. But I don't think that doesn't work, right?
I mean,
you can't come from another multiverse and then create the multiverse that didn't exist before you created it.
Yeah, I get. Yeah, because they've already established that the time travel doesn't work the way it does in Back to the Future. So
yeah,
it's I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But because the other thing, and this doesn't necessarily clear up any of our questions or anything like that, but we'll talk about this because in the credits, this character is still referred to as the variant. And even though we're assuming that this is the character referred to in Marvel Comics as Lady Loki, an international version of the credits that you can see from this episode in the Castilian Spanish version of the credits actually gives her a name, and it's Sylvie. And funnily enough, Sylvie is a character from Marvel Comics that has surprising ties to Loki. Her name's Sylvie Lushton. She's a human girl from Oklahoma, and she gains magical powers after the Asgardians settle New Asgard in Oklahoma. And so it's interesting that Asgard has already been established in a different place other than Oklahoma after Ragnarok destroyed it. So I don't know if there's anything to be gleaned from that detail. But Sylvie eventually finds out that the magic powers that she is given that empower her to take on the mantle of Enchantress, not to be confused with the villain from Suicide Squad. But her powers were actually given to her by Loki. And it seems like they were almost given to her as kind of for his own amusement, because apparently he, quote, liked the idea of creating a mortal who suspects she's one of my kind. So we wanted to make her think that she was Asgardian, that she had these magical powers, when really she was just, given them. And
But she clearly has powers here.
she clearly, well, I mean, she does have powers, like they're given to her. But if it's this character is Sylvia Lushton, then it would stand to reason that there's maybe somebody pulling the strings behind that gave her these powers. And I think the prevailing theory right now, and this was something that was discussed not to this detail, but that Richard E. Grant is also a cast member in this show. That much has been confirmed, and the speculation has been that he will be playing an old version of Loki. So it's possible that this is something that Old Man Loki has done for whatever purpose, whether it's just to mess with the timeline, causing mischief, or if he has some kind of larger plan. But there's even the chance that Old Man Loki is the reason that there potentially aren't timekeepers, and maybe he's controlling Ravonna as well. But it seems like if this, accidental naming of this character is actually Sylvie, that maybe this character isn't what we originally thought.
How many Lokis do you think can be in the show named Loki?
I mean, probably endless, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that logo might make even more sense.
That's true.
There's even more Lokis. But okay, we should talk about Lady Loki, who everybody assumed was the variant. And in the comics, after the events of Ragnarok, Loki was reborn into the body of Lady Loki because the comics are weird, and I don't know, they're too comic book me for me at times. But she definitely has the look of Lady Loki in the comics.
Doesn't Lady Loki have dark hair in the comics?
Oh, does she? I think I saw like some panels with lighter hair. Maybe I could be wrong. I have not read those comics, so that is in my pile of shame that I've not gotten to. But okay, let's talk about something else for a second. Let's talk about what is the variant's end game. Because at one point we thought maybe this is another version of Loki who is trying to, take over the TVA, wants to control the timeline. But at one point, this variant says she's not interested in ruling the TVA. So what is she trying to do here? And also, if she's not trying to take over the TVA, why would she want to know the location of the timekeepers?
Yeah, this is a good question, and especially because what she's doing is she's obviously trying to disrupt the sacred timeline. So how that benefits her, or what she's trying to do, that remains unclear as well.
Yeah, I don't have a theory on this one, so I guess we're just going to wait till next episode. Also, do we think the TVA is going to be able to stop any of these branches from reaching the red line, or do you think it's just going to happen? Like, it seems like it's inevitable. It doesn't seem like they have enough people to stop all those branches, especially after Lady Loki or the variant or whatever you want to call her took out so many of the Minutemen, like in the preceding weeks, to get all those charges. Doesn't seem like they have the the troops to stop all that. So what was that quote I read earlier? It was like, we'll destroy time as we know it, or something like that. Are we going to see that happen here?
I mean, at the very least, I think there will be the threat of it. We know that this is something that will have huge ramifications on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we know that Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is coming. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure, because Michael Waldron, the head writer of Loki, wouldn't say anything about whether or not the TVA factors into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, because they don't want to say whether or not the TVA, I guess, will still exist by the end of this series. It's always possible that that's something that falls apart and is only here in this show for this time, and that when they crumble, that's why Doctor Strange has to deal with that Multiverse of Madness. So yeah, I think it's at the very least we're getting to the point where like something we'll get some form of resolution, but it will also leave dangling threads for the future.
Yeah, and by the way, that quote was the destruction of the timeline and the collapse of reality as we know it. which sounds pretty huge. So maybe we don't want that to happen. But
maybe.
Okay, we're going to have to reconvene next week. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, do we miss anything, let us know at peter@slashfilm.com. I'm going to put a link. I'm going to put a bunch of links in the show notes because we wrote a bunch of articles on Loki this week on Slash Film. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't get to cover. There's some great deep dives from Vanessa, from you, from HT, talking about what this all could mean and how it could all fit together. So definitely check those out if you can. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please go. If you like this episode, this is free. We don't even have ads in the episodes. If you like this episode, just take 30 seconds of your time. Go to Apple Podcasts, write like a 1-sentence review telling everybody why you like it, and give us 5 stars. That helps people find this podcast, and that helps us grow quite a bit. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.